Okay, so have you ever like read a research paper or, like a news story about a new study and you're just like, really?
Yeah.
Is that really true?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's like some of those findings, they just seem a bit like too good to be true, you know?
Exactly. And so today we're going to do a deep dive into this idea that just sometimes research findings might be, well, a tad
A
exaggerated.
little bit hyped up, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. And it turns out there's this surprisingly common mistake that researchers can make when they were reporting how strong their findings are.
Like how big of a deal their results actually are.
Right, and it all comes down to this thing called Eta-Squared.
Ah, Eta-Squared, the bane of many a student's existence.
But seriously, what is Eta-Squared? Like, can we break that down for folks who maybe haven't encountered it before?
Absolutely. So Eta-Squared is basically like a scorecard. It tells you how much of a study's results can be attributed to the specific factor they were testing. Like if we're looking at, say, the effect of a new teaching method on student performance, Eta squared would tell us what percentage of the improvement in scores is due to the new method.
Oh, okay, so it's like saying, hey, this is how important this variable is.
Precisely. But here's where things get a little tricky. There are actually two types of Eta squared: classical and partial.
Oh, two types. So, like, we're comparing apples to slightly different apples.
Yeah, something like that.
So why does it even matter which type of Eta-Squared we're talking about?
Okay, so imagine you're baking a cake, right? And you're claiming that your incredible baking skills are responsible for like 110% of its deliciousness.
Okay, that's some serious baking confidence, and also not really possible.
Exactly. And that's kind of what happens when researchers mix up their Eta squareds. Classical Eta squared looks at the total variation in the results, like how much all the factors combined contribute to the outcome.
Got it. So, like, everything that went into making that cake delicious.
Right. But partial Eta squared is more focused. It only looks at the variation explained by one specific factor after removing the influence of other factors.
So in our cake analogy, maybe the recipe was foolproof, or maybe you had a top-notch oven, so your amazing baking skills weren't the only thing that made the cake great.
Exactly. And that's why partial Eta squared can sometimes give you a misleadingly high score, because it's zeroing in on one specific relationship while ignoring the contributions of other factors.
That makes sense. So basically, partial Eta-Squared can make a factor seem way more important than it actually is.
Right. And to make matters worse, there's a study by Pierce, Block, and Guinness published in Educational and Psychological Measurement, and they found that multiple psychology studies reported Eta squared values that added up to over 100%.
Wait, over 100%? How is that even possible? That's like having a pie chart where the slices are bigger than the whole pie.
It's not possible, of course. What happened is that these researchers were mistakenly reporting partial Eta squared values as if they were classical Eta squared, which led to those impossible totals.
So they were basically saying that their factors explained more than 100% of the outcome, which obviously doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is this even happened in some pretty high-profile journals.
Whoa, so even the experts can make these mistakes.
It happens more often than you might think. For example, Shepard and McNulty published a paper in Psychological Science where they were looking at how people react emotionally to expected and unexpected outcomes.
Okay,
And they reported a classical Eta squared of 0.46 for the main effect of expected grade and 0.85 for the main effect of received grade.
hold on, let me get my calculator out. Yeah, that adds up to 1.31. Definitely a problem.
A big problem, because they're essentially saying that those two factors alone explain 131% of the variation in the study's results.
So basically, they're accidentally inflating the importance of their findings. Okay, so we've got these researchers accidentally exaggerating their findings. But does it really matter? Like, does this actually affect how we understand research?
Oh, absolutely, it does. It's like, imagine building a whole theory on top of findings that have been sort of like pumped up artificially. It could throw off entire areas of research.
Okay, yeah. I'm starting to see why this is important. But let's say I'm reading a paper and I come across some Eta-Squared values that seem kind of fishy. What should I look out for? Are there any red flags?
Well, one thing to watch for is like language that overemphasizes the findings. Like if they use phrases like strong support or conclusive evidence, but the effect sizes they report are actually pretty small. That's a bit of a warning sign.
So even if the study says they found a statistically significant result, I got to check that Eta-Squared and see if the effect is actually meaningful.
Right. Statistical significance just tells you that the results probably aren't due to random chance.
Yeah.
But Eta squared, or effect size, tells you about the magnitude of the effect. Like how much of the difference in the outcome is actually explained by the thing they were studying.
Okay, that makes sense. So a statistically significant result with a tiny Eta-Squared might not be a big deal in the real world.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
imagine you find a statistically significant correlation between the number of ice cream cones sold and the number of shark attacks.
Okay, but doesn't mean one is causing the other, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The correlation might be there, but it doesn't mean much practically. And that's where critical thinking comes in. We need to be able to assess the practical significance of research findings, not just whether they're statistically significant.
Gotcha. So we can't just blindly trust the p-value.
Right. And this is especially important when you're looking at meta-analyses, which are supposed to be these big, comprehensive overviews of a research topic.
Yeah, because if those meta-analyses are based on studies with inflated Eta-Squared values,
Yeah.
then the whole meta-analysis could be skewed too.
Exactly. It creates a ripple effect that can lead to misleading conclusions about a whole area of research.
This is starting to feel like a detective story. You know, we have to be on the lookout for these subtle clues that something might not be quite right with the data.
I like that analogy.
But let's be real, most people aren't statisticians. So what are some practical tips for the everyday person who's just trying to make sense of all this research?
Well, one simple thing is to look for studies that have been replicated. If multiple studies have found similar results using appropriate methods, that gives you more confidence in the findings.
That basically strengthen numbers.
Yeah. But then, of course, you've got those times when you're bombarded with like conflicting research findings. One study says this and another study says that. So how do you know what to believe?
Right. It's like information overload.
And that's where understanding things like Eta-Squared can really help. By focusing on the effect size, you can get a better sense of the practical significance of the findings, even when the studies seem to be contradicting each other.
That's really helpful. So we've got replication and effect size. Are there any other tools we can use to navigate this complex world of research? So we've got replication, we've got effect size. What else? What other tips do you have for us to become like, total research ninjas?
Well, it's not just about being critical of the research itself. We also have to be aware of our own biases and how those biases might be influencing like what we choose to read and how we interpret the findings.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to just gravitate towards research that confirms what we already believe, even if the effect size is small or the study isn't that great.
Exactly. We all have our own sort of like pet theories, and it's tempting to cherry pick the evidence that supports them. So it's really important to try to approach research with an open mind, consider different perspectives, even the ones that you might not agree with.
So basically be open to being wrong.
Yeah, pretty much. Because sometimes the research that challenges our beliefs is the research that helps us learn and grow the most.
Okay, so to recap, when it comes to evaluating research, we need to remember three things. Look for replication, focus on the effect size, and be aware of our own biases. Did I get that right?
You got it. And one more thing to keep in mind, research is an ongoing process. New evidence is always emerging. So our understanding of a topic can evolve over time.
That's true. It's like that saying, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing.
I like that. It's all about staying curious, keeping an open mind, and being willing to update our beliefs as new information comes along.
Awesome. Well, that's some great advice for navigating not just the world of research, but life in general.
I think so, too.
So to wrap things up, next time you see a headline about some groundbreaking new research, remember to channel your inner detective. Ask yourself, okay, but what's the Eta-Squared? And think about those apples. We got to make sure we're comparing the right ones.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Being a smart consumer of research is all about being informed and asking the right questions.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder this. What other subtle factors could be influencing how we interpret research and maybe even the world around us? Happy researching, everyone.